Savers are losers. Do you agree?
That's a controversial way to start a podcast,
Yeah.
Brent.
Are you a loser? I mean, a saver? We want to talk a little bit about the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. This is a book by Robert Kiyosaki, written in 1997 originally. So it has impacted many people over the years. And why do we want to talk about this book? Well, I think this book has been quoted or cited by a lot of real estate investors as being very pivotal. You know, they're going about their everyday life. They pick up this book and they read it and they change directions. So it's a bit of a paradigm shift. I like that word, apparently. I think I say paradigm. You have one paradigm, one frame of mind, and then you read a book and it completely changes everything. And I think that was, for a lot of people, this book. And
Well, it's worth 20 cents.
Is it?
Well, if you have one dime and you get another one, that's a pair of dimes, right?
Oh, man.
I couldn't let that go by.
Okay.
But yeah,
That's
it's a
my
mindset
20
shift.
cents. Yeah, totally mindset shift. So we want to talk a little bit about, we've kind of broken this book down into three sections. Not three sections, but some of the concepts into three sections. So we can kind of do this in bite-sized chunks without elaborating too much and see where Mark goes with this and how long he talks about it. But the idea is that we want to understand a few things about financial education, investing, real estate. This book, it changes your perspective because it's kind of, so it's written in a bit of a story form, but it also has like very specific lessons. And it's written for, I want to say the average American, but it's written to the average American who goes through the system, right?
Yeah.
So Robert kind of highlights that, you know, we have a system, which means like an education system. You have societal forces around you that basically say, like, you know, you're a husband and wife, you have a kid, you do this, you go to school, then you know, after school, you go to post-secondary school, you get a job. And then your life should be this, right? There's expectations in that system, right?
Yeah.
You're going to work every day, 9 to 5 for this many days of the week. And then the result is you're going to have this dream life, right? Maybe. Yeah. But that's kind of the system and the mindset that he's writing this book to, right?
Yeah.
He's writing this book to these people.
And it was controversial, right?
When it came out. Yeah.
People
See, I
were
wasn't
like,
alive.
"This is-"
Oh, I was alive, but I wasn't able to read when it came out. See? So
You are able to read
I'm at
now,
a
right?
disadvantage. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm slowly learning to
Okay,
read,
good.
but in 97, I was 6. Yeah.
Wow.
So I was just, maybe I could say dad, you know? Poor dad.
Stop saying that, Brent.
Yeah. This is my poor dad. Yeah. So
But yeah, to your point, right? It kind of bucked the trend, spoke out against the sort of system that we had in place, and a lot of people didn't like that. Like, this is bad financial advice. It's going to lead people to ruin, et cetera, et cetera. And now,
But in fact, it's changed a lot of people's lives.
yeah, like if you listen to any real estate podcast that
Yeah.
has successful folks on it, like not like ours, but other ones. And they'll be like, sometimes they'll have questions, right? What book most influenced you? Like you hear Rich Dad, Poor Dad all the time.
Yeah.
And, not just older folks, but younger folks too.
Yeah.
And I never read the book actually until recently.
Yeah.
Right. But I've read heard all the concepts, most of the ideas over and over in other books, right? Because it's influenced a generation of investors and writers with these ideas. And it's pretty influential.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just jump into a little bit of the story. So for people who haven't read it, you got to check this thing out. I mean, it's pretty accessible, and maybe it won't be for you, but if you're listening to this podcast and you're interested in investing in real estate and money and economics, then this is, we think, a great read. But essentially, Robert Kiyosaki is the character, and he kind of describes his childhood, and he had two dads. And I say that's kind of weird, but one's actually his...
Not that way.
Yeah. One's actually his biological father.
Yeah.
And the other one is his friend's father.
Yeah. Who had a big influence on his life.
So his biological father was this educated man. He was in academia. He had a good job, and the standards of the day, standards of the world, right? He went to school. He got a good job. He was a professor. So he had, like, presumably a good pension.
Yep.
You know, he was kind of taken care of with the system. Whereas his friend's father, who he spent a lot of time...
and status as well, right?
Yeah, status, yeah.
You know, like nice car, nice house, all that stuff.
Yeah, big house, whatever.
Which his biological dad believed in.
Yeah, so then his friend's father, he spent a lot of time with his friend, and his friend's father did mentor him a lot. He was an entrepreneur and a businessman and an investor, and he thought about money completely differently. You know, what money can get you and what you should do with it and how you should get it and how you should think about it.
And he talked about it.
Yeah.
A lot. As opposed to, we'll call him poor dad, Robert Kiyosaki's dad. Like, we don't talk about money.
Yeah.
Right? That kind of attitude.
You just spend it and you... Yeah, so that ties into this whole premise of financial literacy and financial education, because he points out, right, that the whole system is set up, but where in the school system, like, I don't know what school you went to, but I never got financial...
Knocks.
Yeah, Hard Knocks. Okay. Is that like Calvinist or Knox?
Yeah, it's 5 points, yeah.
Okay. That's a reformed joke. All right.
We're getting off track. Look, I completely threw you off.
So, but yeah, where in your education system do you learn financial literacy? Or how do you know you're financially literate is another question, right? Like,
yeah,
I know that I can count, so therefore I can count money, and that's all I need to know, right?
Yeah.
And I can add and subtract and divide, so I should be good at finance, like dealing with personal finance, if I know how to do basic math, right?
Okay, here's a quick question for you, which we haven't talked about, but, like, whose responsibility is it? Is it the school system or is it parents to educate their kids on financial literacy? And I mean, you may have parents that are not financially literate, so does the school have to pick up the slack, or like? What do you think?
Well, on the school is when you say the school, like what school?
School system.
Right? Yeah, if we're talking about the public system where the government funds it.
Yeah.
So children are the responsibility of their parents.
Yeah.
And if you have a school system that is government funded, paid for by tax dollars, technically, like the parents have the primary responsibility to educate this stuff. But yeah, if they don't know, maybe you rely on somebody else. But if you send them to school and you just think they're going to learn what they need to know, no, they're going to learn what the system wants to teach them, right?
Yeah.
And so somebody is deciding what is important to teach, but then also with regards to financial literacy, like what do we want children to know growing up? And what do we want them to do for our society, right? Like if you have a school system that's producing kids, the kids come in, that's the input to the school system.
The parents
and then Mark
the kids.
Slipped out. And but they're trying to produce members of society that will contribute in a positive way, that will add, right? Like we talk about the economy and how we're in a situation where we need to have immigrants, so we need to have people come and join the economy and produce something. Okay, well, if you have your school system, you have kids, you got to make sure that they're producing. So, but is there specific things that the government, that's the other question, is there specific things that the government wants you to know or doesn't want you to know? And then how does that reflected in the curriculum, right? And financial literacy, and that's the thing he points out right off the hop, right, is financial literacy is completely disregarded in the education system. Yeah. And as a result, I think parents might not be so savvy themselves, right?
Right.
So if the responsibility is for the parents to teach it, well, they went through the same system. Like, it's just being perpetuated for so long.
Yeah.
We kind of try it with this podcast to shed light on how complex the system is too, just so that it's basically it's a wake up call to say, hey, look, you need to be more literate financially.
Yeah. Whether you like it or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Just because that's the reality of, all these complexities of the system and how they're going to basically railroad over you.
Yeah.
If you don't. So that's the first kind of concept of the book is financial literacy. Get financial literacy. I forget how he actually says to do that.
Well, read his book. I guess that's a start.
Read his book. Well, so he didn't get that from his poor dad, right? So his well-educated father, which is kind of like this ironic thing, right? Because you have a very well-educated father who's a professor.
Yeah.
But he's not financially literate. So the outcome of his life is the thing. You can get into the purpose of your life too, right? And that's something, is finance the only purpose of your life? No. But disregarding it is what we believe not stewardly, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Make the most of what you have or what you're given. And yeah.
So, and then Robert's rich dad, which I don't know at the time when he was being mentored by him if he was actually a rich, wealthy guy, but he was on track to be.
Yeah. He was, I think he was wealthier than he let on.
Yeah.
Like just when you read through the book, right? He didn't have the trappings of wealth. He didn't have a fancy car or nice clothes or a nice house or whatever, but he was building that foundation and he could see
in the future.
Yeah. And I think he talks about the difference between being broke and being poor. Even after a major financial setback, he said, I'm broke, but I'm not poor.
Right.
Because the poor is a mindset.
Right.
And kind of stood by that through the whole time, right?
Yeah.
And you can see that in other people too, or people building a business, right? They have that mindset, and they may not have. It may not look like they have much.
Yeah.
I've seen this time and again with business owners, right?
Yeah.
Where their lifestyle doesn't really change.
Scraping by.
Well, A, they're scraping by, or B, it just looks like it, but they realize the business is growing and there's wealth here, and I could buy a nice Porsche or upgrade my porch for the house. There's a joke there, I think, about the painter who, says, paint the porch. Okay, I painted the car, now what next? No. Anyways, rather than, and we'll talk about this, assets and liabilities, rather than spending the money on liabilities, put it back into the business or invested it somewhere else. Yeah. Knowing they'd get that return, right? Buying a piece of real estate, you get nothing right now, and you get the return later. So I think it was the same kind of thing with his father. There was probably a lot of money around, but he wasn't spending it foolishly and on unnecessary things. Yeah.
So if you go through the traditional school system and you rely on that for your financial education, the outcome of that is just basically going to be the status quo, right? And so his poor dad was an exhibit of that, but his rich dad was one who basically said, you know what, I'm going to shake off the traditional education system. And maybe he went through it. I don't know if he dropped out. I think he
didn't even finish high school, I don't think.
So, but I mean, at that time, that would have been probably more common that people weren't finishing school. Like now, I think a lot more people go through the entire system. And but like I said, he was an entrepreneur. So he was, ready to embrace a completely different mindset, take risks, and then also teach himself about money, right?
Yeah.
So read, learn, discuss with other people, and then it's interesting the way he kind of put that onto Robert and his son. So Robert and his friend
Mike, I think, right?
Yeah, as they're growing up, the tasks that they have to do as children, right?
How mad the kids got.
Yeah. Well, teaching them the value of money, right? For starters, right? You got to work hard for this, but also teaching them like how to think creatively about how to get it and how to provide value to people. And yeah, that's completely out of the realm of the current education system.
Yeah.
Like they don't talk about that at all, right?
Nope.
As far as I'm concerned, or as far as anyways, I went through the education system. I didn't learn any of this.
Well, and like quick side note, when you study economics.
When you say quick side note.
Yeah, this is, it'll be about an hour.
Yeah.
No, but when you study economics, like I think back to, I did an OAC economics course. So that was like.
Not an AOC one.
No, no, that's completely different. Back in the day, if you were going to go to university, you had to have what were called OACs, I think Ontario Academic Credits.
Okay.
So it was like an additional set of courses past grade 12, grade 13 they called it to qualify for university. So if you were diligent, you could do your OACs in grade 12, right? And I think I left it till like the last minute, and I'd been accepted, but I had to have my OACs done. I had to do a summer one. Anyway, so I did economics. Right. And I thought it was pretty cool. I learned about supply and demand and deficit spending and all this stuff. Right. Right. And I learned about a man called John Maynard Keynes and how he's the father of modern economics and all this stuff. Right. So there was never, I didn't learn about Austrian economics or Mises or Hayek or any of these guys. Right. Until recently. Right. We just take for granted that Keynesian economics is how economics works.
Yeah.
And it's like, it isn't.
Yeah.
It's a theory, and that theory leads to modern monetary theory and the mess that we're in. Yeah. But just as an example of, when you go through our current system, and I've heard somebody as well who was like working in finance, who has a degree in finance, say like, I never heard that there was an alternative to Keynesian economics. Like never in my whole going through high school, university, all this stuff, never heard that there was a different way of thinking about economics.
Yeah.
And it's just it's crazy how if you take the system at face value, I say this system, we're not like fighting the man or anything like that, but you have to educate yourself. You have to look at the alternatives, and
and then I'm sure it's like this in many different fields. Like economics is one. We're talking about economics. That's what the podcast is about, right? But they're like, for example, health and nutrition. Like how many different ways of thinking about health and nutrition are there? Out there, right? And what school of thought influences most of our education system? I don't know, right? I'm not an expert on that topic, but I can imagine in all kinds of different topics, until you actually read it, you don't know, right? And it's funny because just a quote from this book. So my highly educated dad, so that's his poor dad, recommended that I do what he did. He said, son, I want you to study hard, get good grades so you can find a safe, secure job with a big company and make sure it has excellent benefits. Mm-hmm. Does that sound bad?
I mean, it does now, but no, I guess on the face of it, no.
No. Like that sounds very reasonable. And like, hey, you're going to study hard, get good grades. That's a good thing, right? You work, you put your talents to use, you get good grades, and you find a safe, secure job with a big company. Nice. Yeah. I have security. I don't have to worry. The company's going to take care of me. Make sure it has excellent benefits.
A lot of people a lot of people think that way right now, right?
Yeah.
That's the path.
But that's his poor dad, right? Yeah. So the rich dad said, my rich dad wanted me to learn how money works so I can make it work for me. Mm-hmm. And that's a completely different mindset, right? To learn how to work for money or have money work for you.
Yeah. And to me, that's the difference between dependence and independence.
Yeah. So dependence being you work for money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You work for, nothing wrong with working for someone, I guess, as long as you have your eyes open, but working for someone as opposed to, working for yourself. Is that fair enough? Maybe not. But I think, yeah, what you said, the difference between money working for you and you working for money. And often that leads to you working for yourself in one way, shape, or form, right? Like if you're buying real estate, you're working for yourself, essentially, right? It's not like us, the typical small business, but you certainly are.
Yeah, and so Robert's point again, or his lesson in this, is that the rich don't work for money, right?
Right.
So people who are wealthy, they're not out there working for money; they're trying to make their money work for them.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to just kind of concisely say the whole book in one sentence, right? But that when you say that, like the money working for you, you kind of hear that out, right? Like, oh, you want your money to work for you, right? It's like, yeah, you do. But what does that actually mean? And how do you achieve that? And what are some possible ways of getting that to happen?
Well, when you see it in like a bank advertisement, make your money work for you. That means buy a GIC and get, 2% interest on your money.
Make a fee and
When in reality,
yeah.
the bank is making your money work for them because
Yeah.
they're lending it out and they're doing all kinds of different stuff with it. They're not just letting it sit somewhere collecting 2% interest.
Yeah. And if you see make your money work for you in other contexts, it could mean like your money is just sitting in your savings account. Let's go take it and do something else with it so that it's whatever, but not necessarily taking control of it yourself.
Yeah.
And purposely doing with it what you ought to be doing. So how do you do that? Well, you obviously become more financially literate. But his contrast, I guess, is like you said, in the mindset, right? So the people who are, I hate saying the word rich because people say, like rich, but the mindset of the rich people is they focus on making their money work for them. And the poor people, they focus on getting that next paycheck.
Yeah.
And just paying the bills and making sure that that paycheck is secure, right? And that there's benefits attached to it. But they don't focus on, once they have the paycheck, now what, right? And what do you do with that paycheck? And then you get in this little trap, right? Where you're continuously trying to get a better job, a promotion, and you're trying to increase your income.
Yeah.
To keep up with your expenses, right? Because, you get married and then you have a house and then you get a car and then you have kids and then the expenses grow throughout your life and your income has to grow to keep up with it. So you're always in this bit of a rat race where you're trying to earn more so that you can pay for all your expenses. And it's just like a simple equation, right? But that's a mindset, what Robert is saying, of a poor person, right? Is thinking, let's just keep up. Yeah. And it's funny, he has like if anyone's read this book, so he has a game called the cash flow game, and it's a board game.
Yep.
And the idea is that you go around a circle, and the circle is called the rat race. And the whole point of the game is to get out of the rat race. And it's just an interesting mindset, right? Because people say, oh, I want to just get out of the rat race. And usually I take that to mean they just want to move somewhere where it's quiet and slow and just keep working for a living. Right? But I guess Robert is saying, the rat race can deal with itself. Let's get out. How do you get out? Right? And then he goes through the rest of the book and describe, like, the goal should be to try and get out of working for money.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to get this game for my kids, I think.
Yeah. It's not cheap.
No.
I think it's like, $100, $200 or something. I don't know. You can play it online too. You can download a little thing.
Maybe we'll start online.
Yeah. So is that making sense so far?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, so we're describing the book and not necessarily our beliefs.
Yeah.
Although I think a lot of what we're talking about is, I think we're going to kind of go through the book and then do maybe a summary at the end, like the good,
our
and bad,
perspective,
and our perspective on it. Because again, our perspective is
not necessarily
is a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we probably agree with most of the concepts in the book, but it's the sort of the motivation, I guess, that would be a little bit different, right? It's not for ourselves.
Yeah,
right?
we're not trying to hoard wealth and make it rich, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. If you do, great. But then you have a responsibility to use that in a very stewardly fashion. So, it's about maximizing what you've been given. If you've been given a brain, then use it.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe don't be content to...
Well, and I think we need a lot more rich Christians out there. People who are inclined, I guess we're all inclined to evil, but people who are renewed, right? Who have faith, who are renewed by the Holy Spirit to be, to seek to be generous and giving, to be thankful, to have that attitude towards their life, but also their finances.
Yeah.
We have more of those people wealthy. That's a good thing.
Yeah, it would be
them,
good
for their churches, for society at large, for everybody, right? To have people who are wealthy, who are ready to, have a positive impact in this world in a meaningful way. And it's beautiful when you see that happen. But I think he's writing this book to, again, the average person who is completely not there, right? They're just getting started, they're getting their career, and they're in the mindset of the system: get a good job, get educated, let's get some security in my life, and let's pay my bills.
Yeah.
So what's the kicker? Is the rich invest in assets.
Yeah.
And the poor people invest in liabilities or buy liabilities.
Yeah, I mean, okay, why don't we talk about assets and liabilities?
Well, that's a huge concept in the book.
Because we've talked about this in the podcast before, but maybe we're taking it for granted, right?
Yeah.
Someone who's never really, or is just kind of getting into this kind of thing, like, what is that?
So Robert breaks it down really, really simply. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket. And a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. Now, I guess he's talking on a monthly basis, right? So
my children are liabilities.
Yes.
Hopefully one day they'll be assets.
Yeah.
Hopefully eventually they'll start putting money in my pocket.
Hopefully they realize there's nothing left in your pocket and they can't take something out.
Sorry, carry on, Brent.
Hopefully your children aren't listening to this.
No, they don't listen.
You guys are currently liabilities, and eventually you're going to be assets. But that's a simple way to describe it, right?
Yeah.
And when you say assets and liabilities, maybe if you're an accountant and you think, your balance sheet and working out all the numbers for a corporation or a business or something and you're thinking about all these line items on your assets column and your liabilities and how to that. He's just saying, look, an asset puts money in your pocket every month. It's something that you own that will pay you money regardless of what you do, essentially.
Yeah.
And we know that's not true for everything, right? If you buy, for example, an asset could be a rental property. If you buy a piece of real estate, it will put money in your pocket every month. Ideally, if you buy the right thing.
Yeah.
It'll put money in your pocket every month, but you're going to have to do work, right? You're going to have to spend time, go and fix stuff from time to time. So it's not completely passive, but his idea is you own something that is in your control that puts money in your pocket. So in the future, right, you're going to be better off because this thing is paying you money. So whether you work or not, you're still earning this income. Mm-hmm. And his whole idea is to get out of the rat race. You want to have enough assets paying you enough passive income, I think is what he calls it, to be able to not have to work.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's where the paradigm shift for a lot of people who quote this book as a real estate investor is, why am I working so hard to pay for the things I need when I could just work and then buy something that pays for the things I need?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So what's an example of a liability? So
liability, in his words, is something that takes money out of your pocket. So you buy a thing, and it doesn't pay you anything every month. In fact, it takes your money. So either it takes your money once when you buy it, or it takes your money every month because you have payments on it or something like that.
So like a car.
Yeah, so car payments, right? So you buy a car, and unless you're an Uber driver and it actually makes you money, but that's actually a liability as well, because you have to put your time in to do it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, even your own, this is the thing. So people think their house is an asset. And Robert basically says, no, unless your house pays you money every month, it's not an asset. It's actually a liability, because you're going to buy your house with a mortgage.
Yep.
And you're going to go to work the next day and start paying that mortgage off, right? That's what everybody does. And they would try and work hard. They get a promotion just to pay down their mortgage. So that the house, which most people think is a liability, is actually, most people think is an asset, is actually a liability. And that's where it's kind of like, it's like a house is generally, what do they say? It's people's biggest purchase.
Yeah.
The most expensive thing you're ever going to buy.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, it's their retirement plan, right? Like, I'm going to own this house for 30, 40 years, and then I'm going to sell it, and maybe you have to downsize, but that money is going to fund my retirement. But Robert's saying, no, you got to spend your working years buying things that actually put money in your pocket. So when you do retire, it's basically just a smooth transition. You have all this income coming in, and you're basically already retired, and you're spending your time doing other productive things for society.
Yeah. Which is an important concept, I think, because a lot of Canadians especially look at their primary residence as their biggest asset.
Yeah.
And, when you look at it from this perspective, because I used to think like that too, right? Because you look at the value going up and you're like, hey, but, that's value on paper. And it is true that maybe when you retire or when you're done, whatever, you could sell that house for a significant profit, but you still need somewhere to live. So unless you're going, downsizing and then taking that extra money and putting it into an asset or something that makes you money, it's not really an asset.
Yeah, like we've talked about house hacking, where you live in part of the house and you rent out part of the house.
Yeah.
So if you can find a way to live in one bedroom of the basement, for example, right?
Yeah.
And you rent out all the other rooms in the house, and it produces enough income so that your house that you live in will pay for the mortgage and the property taxes and the insurance and the utilities and whatever other maintenance expenses. And every month it's going to pay you a profit. Well, now it's an asset.
Yeah.
But at that point, it's essentially a rental property too, right?
Yes.
Where you rent one of the units for a small fee.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you can mitigate your liabilities sometimes, right? Like we've used a refinance to buy rental property.
Yeah.
Right. And that worked out well. So in that case, it's, maybe it's like half and half or whatever, it's partially an asset, partially a liability, but you got to be careful with that too.
Yeah.
But it is a good point that generally speaking, your home is not an asset, right?
Yeah.
It's not doing, you need a home, you need a car, you need certain things, but that doesn't mean they're not liabilities because you're paying for them.
And the other thing he says too is it's okay to buy liabilities, right?
Yeah.
But he looks at it, when can I afford a liability is when I have enough passive income from my assets that I can afford to just use that money to pay for the liability, right? So a liability could be like a nice vacation or a luxury item that you don't really need, but you want, right? So, we buy these all the time, but then he's saying, what do you buy them with? You buy them with your job income, because then they're even bigger liabilities. But if you're okay to buy them if you can afford them from the income from your assets.
Yeah, so that's a different twist on living within your means, right?
Yeah.
Buying something with existing income, or that existing income will cover, versus you've got a job and you have to save, and then you look at your budget and you can kind of fit the payments into that budget, and then you buy something. That's a different way of looking at it, right?
Yeah. And so this is a very, very important concept, Mark.
Hold on, let me get a pen.
Yeah. You could just listen.
Okay.
So I'm going to verbally describe
I don't do that
this.
very well. I don't know if you've noticed.
So assets and liabilities is important, right?
Yep.
The concept of those. But and how do we connect this with financial literacy? Because that's also very important. Okay, so financial literacy, I guess he has these two sheets. He has the income statement and the balance sheet. And when I first read this, I don't know how many years ago, when you said income statement and balance sheet, I had no idea what that meant. And at the very least, I thought income statement, balance sheet, that's for companies to deal with, right? Like an accountant's to figure that stuff out. But he makes it very, very, very simple for people to understand that you have an income statement and a balance sheet for yourself.
Yes.
Or your family, your household, right? And what does that income statement and balance sheet actually mean? So how do you interpret that? And how do you use it in your life, right? And so an income statement has an income and expenses, and just super simple, right? Income is where do you get money from? Expenses is what do you have to pay, right? And then he has the balance sheet, which is assets and liabilities. So super simple. He says 4 boxes. And then what you do is he kind of has all these diagrams in the book describing how money flows through these various things. So, and that's the cash flow, right? So if money comes into your income, right? So you go to work, you make money, you have income, and then you spend it on expenses, right? The cash flow has a certain pattern, right? It comes in your income, it goes out your expenses, and it's gone.
Yep.
Okay, so we never see that money again. So he kind of gives you a few different diagrams of the cash flow patterns of a poor person, and then the cash flow patterns of a rich person, just so that it changes your mindset of how does a wealthy or rich person think about where the money is flowing, right? And maybe not every wealthy person is literally just thinking about these diagrams all the time, but in effect, they're putting this into practice.
Yeah.
Right. And it's cool because he breaks it down so you can do it simply in your life too. But, so he says the poor person has money coming in from their job into the income. Maybe you can pull these up on the screen, but you can read the book, folks. You got to read this book. Anyways. So the poor person has income coming in from their job and they spend it on expenses. So they got their taxes, rent, food, transportation, clothes, whatever it is, gone. And their balance sheet doesn't have anything on it because they don't have any assets, no liabilities yet, right?
Yep.
But the middle class person, he has these 3 tiers. So poor, middle class, wealthy. The middle class person, they have their job income comes in as a salary, and then they'll go start buying some liabilities now, right? So they get a little bit more money than the poor person. They're not having all their income spent on their expenses, right? They're going to have a little bit left over. They can start to save some money, and they're going to get a house. Mm-hmm. So they're going to have a mortgage. There's a liability. And then they're going to have a car. They're going to get a car loan, and that's a liability. And then they're going to have credit card debt or school debt. And so essentially, the money comes in, the income, it goes out to pay for some liabilities. Then what's left over goes to pay for their expenses, and then it's gone.
And no assets.
And no assets yet.
I've just pulled it up on the screen so anybody watching.
So you can see, So the rich person, the wealthy person, we describe this for people. So they're going to have their income, rather than coming from their job, is going to come from their assets.
Right.
And that's where the whole thing flips over, right? It's okay, people are like, how in the world do I have money getting paid to me, income, coming from something that I don't have to go to work for?
Yeah.
And that's where it just shakes you right up. You're like, okay. So, and the whole point is that the rich or the wealthy person cash flow pattern is you own things that pay you every month. Assets. And that's on your balance sheet on the assets category. And that pays you income in the form of rental income, dividends, interest, royalties, whatever you own, right?
Yep.
Could even be intellectual property, right? Like you had an idea and you patented it and whatever, and it's paying you, right? So you have all these assets paying you income. And then from there, you can afford to pay your expenses and your liabilities, right? And you don't buy liabilities until you can afford to pay them with all the asset income. And that's a complete paradigm shift.
Yeah, so I guess I can't remember if it was in the book or not, but something about like buying a nice car.
Yeah.
And the difference between waiting until you actually have the income from somewhere, you don't have to work for it to buy that nice car, versus buying a nice car now and you have to work every day to pay for it. And if you stop working, you can't pay for that car anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And not that I'm advocating buying a nice car, but it's the sort of that, it's a, like you said, it's a different thought pattern, right? Like, you can have nice things, but make sure that when you have those nice things, you can afford them, and not, just through a job, through a salary.
Because the trick here is that, and he defines that as the rat race, right? The trick is that if you're stuck where your income pays for expenses and liabilities all the time, you're never going to be able to afford to buy assets.
Right.
And so not only in that situation, not only are you not thinking about assets because it's not even on your radar because you haven't learned this financial education that we're all teaching you here, but you're also just not going to have the leftover. And that's why it's the rat race, right? It's the circle around and around and around. And the mindset is usually, I need to make more money. I need to, they need to give me a raise. I deserve a promotion. Yeah. Why don't they pay for this for me? Why is this so expensive? Why can't they pay for my program? Why can't everything be free? Right? Why can't I get a pair of dimes?
I don't have 2 dimes to rub together.
Yeah, I don't have 2 dimes to rub together.
It used to be 2 nickels, but with inflation, it's dimes now.
Yeah.
That's the paradigm shift.
Oh, boom. Oh, man. Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, so that's, that I'm just going to pull up that chart or diagram again, right? Very simple, but very powerful as well. And I guess one thing that stands out for me is that it's much easier to start this process when you're young.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? 100%.
Right. As opposed to, a middle-aged fellow like me, trying to get back into it. Right. I kind of started fresh, 10, 12 years ago, when I remarried, and, it's getting there. But had I known all this stuff in my 20s and started getting some kind of assets then and held on to those assets, so much easier than trying to do it when you're older.
Yeah, because when you're young, you don't have your expense column might be a lot lower, right? Because you don't have things, generally speaking, and you might be living with your parents still, or you're sharing a place with a bunch of buddies or something like that, where your expenses are a lot lower than if you have, a family and you have education to pay for and all this stuff, right? And presumably also you don't have any liabilities because maybe you haven't even bought a car yet, right? Or are you very prudent that way? So if you start with a clean income statement, balance sheet, and you start getting some income, maybe you have some expenses, but the mindset of a poor person is I just pay for the expenses, and let's say I'm making $20,000 a year, I spend all of it. That's a poor person.
Well, you can always find liabilities. Yeah. And usually you do.
Yeah, because we're gravitated
to cover your cash flow.
Yeah.
To eat the cash flow. Yeah. Well, I think back to when I was young, right? I started working relatively, probably 14 or so, as soon as I could. Just retail and stuff like that. But
save your money.
Yeah, I never saved.
You just spent it all.
Yeah.
So you were a poor person, according to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, going back to education and parents, that's the pattern that most people will follow unless they have habits that are ingrained into them when they're young by their parents.
They'll see their parents going, no, that's what I got to do.
They see what their parents do, but then also if you have the ability to either, some people will do it with an allowance and start that way, or if the kids get a job, whatever, you have to teach them like, well, teach them this, and also teach them like you're especially when you have no liabilities, your cash shouldn't be just gone.
Yeah.
Every time you get a paycheck, you spend it on something.
Yeah.
Right?
See, I was a bit different. Like I worked as well, and then I would save, right, and generally not spend until I had some project that I wanted to do because I thought it was fun. So you know, hey, let's invest on it's a small form of investing. Let's try and see if this works, you know?
Right.
Like, let's build a thing and whatever. You never actually make any money, but you're thinking about how can I produce something with what I already got. But yeah, then you said it was easier for young people, and it 100% is. I mean, what we're trying to say now with this podcast too is that like it's gonna get harder.
Yes.
Right. And that, like, for when you were a young person till now, I mean, that's been like 50 years or something.
That's not as bad as what I thought. When you were painting on the cave walls.
Yeah. Judging by the size of your beard. But like asset prices are just so much higher now, right?
Yeah.
So to actually get assets in your life, it's going to take more work, more creativity, more sacrifice, right? Whereas before, especially when Robert wrote this book, like 20 something years ago, like it's a different thing, right?
Yeah.
And there's different parts of the world, like in the US, he's a US. So all this stuff is from the US, some of the examples as well. And, but yeah, they have different opportunities as well, right? For what you can buy assets for, some of the regulations around this stuff. Canada's different. So definitely have to educate yourself on that as well.
Yeah.
As what works where you are, right?
Yeah, I am a little bit encouraged talking to some young people, like some, I don't know. I'm an old curmudgeon, but you talk to some young folks and you just kind of shake your head and like there's no hope for humanity. But then other folks, and this has probably been like the same through the ages, right? You'll get some that are go-getters and some that aren't. But there's lots of opportunities still, right? And a lot of them are online or, I don't even know, like I'll read about certain things and be like, I had no idea you could do that. Kids making money selling sneakers, all kinds of different stuff, right? Yeah. There are opportunities out there where it doesn't mean you need to save $100,000 to go buy a house, right? We like real estate, but that's not the only
that's not
asset,
the only
and
thing.
that's not the only income stream, especially when you're starting. You can't.
Yeah.
Right. We think you should own real estate, but there's so much, so many different opportunities out there if you know where to look. And, we talked a little bit about AI last podcast. Okay. I talked about it a lot. Right? I started on a rant and you cut me off. But there's, if you stay up to date, there's so many opportunities there as well. Right. We're at a sort of a turning point in Western civilization, I think, with the advent of AI and a lot of this other stuff, right? There's lots of opportunities for kids, for anyone, but especially, kids to figure out how to produce some income.
Yeah. And acquire assets.
And yes, and then, not spend it on like your car stereo.
I think the difficulty is like, especially when you're young, but the temptation's there for everybody, right? Is to want to fit in.
Yes.
To want to fit the mold of the system, to want to not be ostracized from society or your family, right? Like if you kind of buck the norms in your family, like kind of be like, oh, what is this guy doing, right? So if you, and that's when you said this book kind of was controversial. So when you put this stuff out there and it doesn't really fit with what's going on in like the world, then you see some of these people putting this into practice. You say, that guy's kind of strange. Like, what's he doing? That doesn't make sense. I don't really, right? And especially for a young person, it probably, I don't want to be different. I want to have friends.
Exactly.
I don't want to be working every Friday, Saturday, like I want to actually have a life. But yeah, that's where like reading this, the mindset shift of, not really worrying what other people think about you and putting some of these things into practice when you're young makes a huge difference when you're older, right?
Yeah.
It sets the trajectory of your life completely different.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people realize some of this stuff through COVID as well. It seems like there's almost this burst of entrepreneurial activity, sort of through COVID. Like you can't, like it really illustrated for a lot of people this path of find that good big company with good benefits and all that stuff.
Yeah. And realize it doesn't necessarily pan out every time.
No, because tons and tons of big companies just were laying off, shut down. And yeah, you know, you could say the government stepped up and put. Well,
and people will really start to notice once you get that job, but you can't afford a house, right? And that's where it's coming to now. Is if I have done everything according to the system, I've got like this. I've tried so hard. I got these good grades. I got a great job. I'm like at the highest thing, and I still can't afford to live in a house that I own.
Yeah, what gives?
Right? Yeah. What? Like, come on, you obviously tricked me, and like, or the system is flawed or failed at me somehow, right?
Yeah.
And then that attitude of, again, pointing the finger at the system, or Mark.
That's fine.
It was you. You were the previous generation. You.
I'm a current generation.
Oh yeah. I don't know. So yeah, here's some quotes here, which are, so it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep. Okay, we can talk about that. Intelligence solves problems and produces money. Money without financial intelligence is money soon gone. And that's so true too, right? Like if you do make money, but you don't have an understanding of how to use it, right? Because ultimately it's just a tool, right? And we talked about this in previous episodes, that money is just, it's just a way of storing the value of what you've worked for. So you've gone to work and you worked hard and you got this medium that stores what you've worked so hard for, right? Yep. And now what? You got this stuff, which is essentially just your time in a little token. It says, look, I got this money. It's storing my time for the future when I want to spend it. But if you don't know, like if you don't have the financial literacy to actually use that money in a proper way, it's gone.
Well, it's why,
or it's consumed.
One reason why many lottery winners end up broke.
Yeah.
Like worse than they were before. And, you know, maybe, you're talking about financial literacy. You could maybe make the argument that someone who's buying lottery tickets probably has low financial literacy, because that's, you know, not everybody's relying on that as their retirement. Some people just do it for fun or whatever, but a lot of people buy them every week.
Yeah.
Or however often, right? They're like, they're investing money into that, right?
Yeah.
And by and large, they're losing it, but every once in a while someone hits it, but then they end up losing all that money because they don't know what to do with it.
Same thing with like athletes, right? Or professional, like celebrities, people who make a lot of money very fast.
Yeah.
But don't have any financial literacy, and they get it, and they're like, you know what? Let's just, and then you lose it right away, right?
And conversely,
that's not being a steward of what you have been given, is it?
No, but there are some who are insanely wealthy.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure they had a nice lifestyle, but they immediately started investing that money in other things.
Yeah.
And
it's like the story of the janitor who died like multimillionaire because he just knew how to handle money. And
haven't heard that story.
No, I tell you. So there was a janitor, and
why don't you tell me, Brent?
Yeah, there was a janitor, and he was a multimillionaire when he died.
That's a great story. We're going to come out with a book, folks. It'll be a very short book.
But the point is, if he knew what to do with his money, right?
Yeah.
Even though he lives a subdued lifestyle, he's not glamorous by any stretch, right? And he just has a regular job. But once he gets the token that represents the value of his time, he doesn't squander it by just spending it on liabilities. Caught myself there. On expenses and liabilities, right? He's putting it to work, buying assets to make more. And that goes back to the parable we talked about, right?
Yeah.
Parable of the talents. And you get given all of these things, and what do you do with them? Do you put them in the sand, or do you make a return? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. Do you have anything else you want to cover for our first segment here?
No.
I think that was a pretty good introduction to the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah, so next time maybe we can get into real estate investing specifically, because Rich Dad, Poor Dad does lay the foundation for financial literacy and kind of what we talked about today. But then Robert Kiyosaki is very involved in real estate investing, and has a lot to offer in terms of how to think about, if you're going to buy assets, which ones do you pick and why? What are some of the opportunities that are out there? So that's what we'll talk about next time.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, folks. Until next time, steward your wealth wisely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We will see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.